Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We are happy to have you here. And we will be talking about politics to talk about. But before we do that, I want to make sure my power is plugged in for the laptop so it doesn't go out. And I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which is a sponsor of Something to Talk About. Fieldstone offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care on their beautiful Rolling Bay campus, right around the corner from Bay Hay and Feed. They have day stay and respite care programs, and they'd love to treat you to lunch and give you a tour. You can have lunch and just look for yourself, too. Call Celia or Jamie to make an appointment for that, 206 594 1010. Or check out their website as a first step, fieldstonecommunities.com. I'd also like to acknowledge that we meet on the ancestral homeland of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people, specifically the members of the Suquamish tribe who have lived in these lands and plied these waters since time immemorial. We are grateful for their stewardship and we are learning from them to this day. I also would like to brag a little bit that we are now listed, this year anyway, as the best of Bainbridge podcast in the Bainbridge Review's annual Best of Bainbridge list. We're grateful for everyone who voted for us, and we're happy to have you all here. So David Harrison is going to talk to us as an expert in the worlds of politics, having spent many years both in public policy at the University of Washington and a veteran of a couple of campaigns himself. So you have some perspective to offer for us, right, David?
I do. So thank you for having me. Welcome to a couple new faces or one or two. And as you know, we're blessed by getting a lot of hits in between where people who on their leisure listen to whatever we say to each other. Um, as advertised, I'm going to talk a little bit about where the presidential race stands post debate and about what Donald Trump should think about Judge Chutkin's release of all of Jack Smith's material, and a little bit about forecasting the Senate and House results. Excuse me. But first, I want to have two sidebars. The first, with regard to the debate, is as you would guess, I'm a little bit obsessed with all this stuff. And so when I go to bed at night, I have drawn conclusions about whatever has happened during the day. You know, I've been a pretty happy person ever since Kamala got in, and certainly since Kamala beat Trump in that debate. So I went to bed having formed the opinion that whatever of the 5 or 6 snap polls that emerged, that citizens, voters would have declared Vance the winner of that debate. I wasn't horribly concerned, but I'm looking for whatever advantage we can get in a tight race. And I woke up in the morning at 6, turned on my cell, and found that 4 or 5 of the 6 debates snap polls thought it was pretty much even, which I thought, wait a minute. So I had a dream last night that we were going to be thought to have lost that debate by 10 points. As of now, it wouldn't matter a lot because other things have happened since, but you always want to win whatever you're doing. So I have a theory. Nate Silver says that Tim Walz, in not contesting various illusions and hallucinations that Vance had about his positions, where he was kind of interested in basically the Democratic agenda, and Tim Walz would say, well, I see we have a little in common there that we can work on. I thought, yeah, with J.D. Vance, good luck with that. But as you know, Walz came on strong, very strong at the end with regard to Vance's election denialism, and then a couple other points, choice quite notably. He did Perry, Vance's alleged interests. So I'm here to tell you, to the extent that he did in general, nobody coached him to look down at his notes too many times, but they did coach him to not do continuous battle with Vance. And this is the reason. Kamala did continuous battle with Trump successfully. Right now, the votes that are at the margin, for the most part, are right there in the center. And those voters, unlike us, are not looking for immediate and constant fact checks of J.D. Vance. They want a a lot of them want a vice president candidate who looks for the common ground and shakes hands and declares sympathy for the other person. So that's why in the CBS Snap poll, Walz's favorability went up by 10 points. So when you're a vice presidential candidate in a campaign as large as this one, pretty close to the largest presidential campaign in history, you got handlers, and I can promise you that the handlers talk to Walz in advance about how many times he should fact check or have the buzzer go off on JD Vance. So I'm fine with all of it. I certainly would have done it slightly different, but I'm certainly fine with it. I was delighted to wake up in the morning and not find a bunch of polls that said that we lost by 10 points, because that's not what they say. The second sidebar before we start, or as we are starting, is Cynthia Schick asked me a question about young men polling significantly, being a gender gap among young men, where a lot of young men are for Trump. This is right now we're in cross tabulation maelstrom where everybody does a poll of 1,000 voters or so, doesn't just look at the results, but then they look at the results by age and race and frequent voters, and those are all crosstabs. And then they write articles about what it all means. And pretty much in a week, you can find a lot of things that are hypothesized. For a long time, there was this hypothesis that we weren't doing so well with Black voters, but there's a lot of crosstabs that say we're doing enormously well with very, very well with Black voters. And there was always a question of the strength or softness of Latino support. I can't really say with regard to young white males who are lately, we're supposed to be feeling that they're a troubled generation. I totally don't get that, because somebody told them they're not the only persons in the world, or what? The fact that young women are going to college in greater numbers and such is not to be seen as a disappointing thing. At any rate, what's happening with young men right now could be that it's a very similar gender gap that we're getting with 50-year-old women who are hugely more supportive of Harris than Trump. But certainly, Cynthia Schick, if Harris's inside pollsters are seeing that, they're working on it, and it could be a disappointing number. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying careful about feature articles that tell us an all new trend and where we're doing better and where we're doing worse. The best of that, because they're not horse race folks, is Pew Research Center. Maybe you've looked at that. And another outstanding news source of demographic information is my blog that goes out tomorrow. It has it as a new NPR report, which interestingly shows us That's great stuff. That shows in all 7 swing states the significant decline in the percentage of voters that are uh, white males. Basically, the demographic change that Republicans were talking about when they lost in 2012, they did. I talked about this before. They did a report called the autopsy when Obama won the second time, and they said we have got to do something to appeal to the demographically changing America, because eventually we're going to be a majority minority country, and then after that we'll have majority minority voters, and then they elected Trump, and since then they've been basically flipping off minority populations. So it's interesting. It's just how long they can get away with it. If it weren't for the electoral college setup, that would have already, they wouldn't get away with it. What they've succeeded in doing is, of course, capturing a high percentage of especially non-college educated white voters who have bought in large measure into Trump's con. At any rate, that's my answer, Cynthia. I think it probably is a factor, but probably not as clear or as monumental as somebody's research might show. And that goes to all the polls. I've watched the polls, and it's just not true that they're not worth watching. It's just true that they need to be watched very carefully. I was telling a friend the other day, 2 things that are prevalent can't be true at the same time. You couldn't be 5% ahead nationally and be virtually even in the swing states because of the way votes are distributed. It's be mathematically. Joe Biden won by 4%. So if he won by 5%, you'd be 9 million votes ahead, even with heavy Democratic concentrations in New York, California. That's just really hard to do. When Joe Biden won by 4%, 7 million votes, he got 300 electoral votes. When Hillary won by 2%, 3 million votes, she could still have won. It took a mathematically virtually impossible distribution of voters for us to lose the blue wall. I'm just saying, whenever you see a 5% national lead for Kamala, just hope that's true, because if that's true, we'll win enough swing states to win the election. Likewise, if that's not true and you're seeing 2 or 3%, then that's why you're seeing close polling in the swing states. A big issue there is whether pollsters corrected for what happened in 2016 and 2020. They say they did. What happened was Trump was undercounted. There's a theory that in 2016 people were too shy to say about him to say that they voted for him. Pollsters say that they've looked at why they undercounted Trump, and in fact, they didn't undercount Trumpism in 2022, but he wasn't on the ballot. So if they're right that they've corrected mostly by sorting partly by what the person says they did in past elections, which amazingly isn't 100% accurate. People forget or lie. But at any rate, they've done some tweaking having to do with that being a factor, and they think that they're more on point this time. So at any rate, those are all sidebars. Sorry it took so long. I'm going to say 10 things that those of you who are having major anxiety attacks should think about, if there's anybody on this call who is wondering how the election's going to turn out, which is right now maybe too close to call. 10 things that some of which we've talked about before that should make us feel pretty good about where Kamala stands. First, polls are showing her closing the gap on the economy. That would explain why Trump's all about eating cats or saving cats in Ohio and all the other lately incredible immigration claims that he's making, like on jobs and healthcare, and just just really making stuff up 100%. Reason why Kamala doesn't say, well, the court border crossings have gone down, which is true, is then he'll go back to 3 years when they were up. At any rate, her economic stuff is resonating, and that's closing that gap. In some polls, it's near even. Secondly, to at least some voters, Trump seems more than the usual amount of unhinged, especially when he called her mentally impaired. So you want to watch that. You want him to keep doing that. Thirdly, and we talked about this before, in 6 or 7 swing states, um, Kamala's got Senate or gubernatorial candidates running slightly ahead of her. That's good. I mean, it's not always the case, but when this cycle started, we were worried that in a lot of those swing Senate races, we'd be running behind. But Jackie Rosen in Nevada, Ruben Gallego in Arizona, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, uh, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, which is now the swing state, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, are all running ahead of Kamala by a little bit, so that's good. They can she can do reverse coattails, although she's the first one on the ballot. That certainly helps with turnout. And monumentally, Kamala's the Josh Stein, the gubernatorial candidate in North Carolina, is running 15 points ahead of the Black Nazi. So that's good because it will discourage Republican turnout in North Carolina, and it's a big boost to have that going on in a state that's polling about even. Kamala's raising more money and has more on hand, and it's doing more advice of her own and as Trump, to the point that they sent $25 million down ballot. There are fewer undecided voters than in recent years, and fewer committed voters who are say they're open to persuasion. So it makes it easier when you have a small lead to sustain that lead if there's fewer undecideds. And that would be, if it's true, that would be because Trump's been around for a long time. So if you're an independent, you've already made up your mind about Trump. Say if you thought a common thing for an independent to say would be, well, chaos surrounds him. And if you form that opinion, you're not likely to unform it. And then Tim, going full circle, Tim Walz is designed as Coach Walz to make you feel better if you're an independent, make you feel better about Kamala, as is, Nikki Haley voters for Kamala and Republican Accountability Project, and everybody's who's trying to peel off Republicans and independents. I mentioned the poll adjustments. That's good. Robert Kennedy remains on the ballot in Wisconsin and Michigan. It's not going to change. I think that's good. They're kind of bros, the two of them. Bobby Kennedy took a dead bear and parked it in Central Park, and Trump's interested in dead cats, so they have a animal lore kind of thing going on. More importantly, choice is on the ballot in Florida, Nevada, and Arizona. So you started thinking about the swing states we want to win and how tough it is out in Arizona. Really helps that you got something that's getting pro-choice women to the polls. And then, as I mentioned, ongoing demographic shifts. I had mentioned before that there's 1 million Latinos in North Carolina now. And the other day, I did a Zoom and we raised $8,000 for canvassing in Latino neighborhoods. So I'm pretty excited about North Carolina, and their organizer reports to me that he thinks things are going great. Common Power, which sends a lot of people into the field, is sending a ton of people out. We'll just see. The other thing I wanted to mention as a change is the next topic, so I'll wait to talk about it. That's Chutkin's release of all this information about Trump's felonious behavior. But let me stop for questions, thoughts, concerns, insults about what I just said about the status of the race. We haven't won. You know, we might have a 60% chance of winning. I would like it to be a lot closer to 100%. If it was pure popular vote, it would be over right now, but it's not. Questions, thoughts?
Sheila,
Yep. I just want to say I thought that the time of yesterday when Liz Cheney and Kamala were at Ripon, which I know really well, with Ripon, Wisconsin, that was superlative. I mean, absolutely superlative move by the Democratic Party over there in Wisconsin. Yes.
I think it's good just because when Liz Cheney was a Republican, her dad was vice president, and so there are Republicans who remember that she wasn't actually a Dan Emmons Republican. She's a very conservative Republican with her voting record. So having her attest to Trump's disqualification is a good thing. And now they're going to put some of Trump's young women, former staffers on the road. That's interesting. So Haley voted for Harris is going strong too. So they're doing everything they can. But certainly Liz Cheney with the right audience is a good addition to the stable. Obama's about to do Pennsylvania big time. I like that. You'd think certain presidential candidates would want Obama because he looms so large, but you can bet Kamala Harris will take Obama every second of the day, and he doesn't want to be president anyway. He's already served his 2 terms.
Just to follow up on that, do you think George W. or any of the other candidates, Romney, etc., are going to come out for Kamala ever?
It doesn't look like it. Had that deep desire and I checked into it. Romney's already said that he's not going to vote for either of them. I was hoping that George W. Bush, relatively late in life, would look at the extent to which Trump has regularly abused him and look at the future of America and take that step. Because I think if George W. Bush did it, we'd win for sure. I mean, I don't think, obviously no single endorsement necessarily means that, but the margins are so close. I do think that it would be hugely significant. What the media is saying now is he's decided not to do it.
we're getting calls all the time for more and more money. I've texted you 20 times. Please give me some more money, says Kamala or Kamala's surrogates. What do you make of the money situation at the presidential campaign level when you compare Trump plus PACs and the money that Kamala has under her control?
Well, it's great. It's wonderful if you look at the numbers. She's got more in the bank and she spent more and she's got more ad commitments and more people in the field. So it's great. What the turnout effort is on the Republican side is a coalition effort with multiple players and many fewer staffers by a lot. It's like 400 Trump staffers versus 1,200 field staffers for Harris. That can matter in a swing state quite a bit. The thing that we don't know is how much dark money that's almost uncountable is out there supporting Trump. As you know, we had a race here. Emily Randall's a good candidate for Congress, but she beat Hillary France because of crypto dark money that she didn't ask for, but we got the benefit of. So dark money can be huge. On the other hand, there's dark money on the Democratic side too. So if that even close to evens out, then Kamala's got the great advantage. So much so that she sent $25 million down ballot to the governor's, the senatorial campaign committee, and congressional campaign committee, some of which they spent on ad buys for Debbie Powell in Florida. So that's nice. It's a generous thing to do, and it helps her. We don't give money. We gave some money to Kamala, but when we give money, it's always to organizers. I want people who are fielding. As you know, I'm a huge fan of Mi Familia Vota for that reason.
Cynthia,
Just something to add, like it could fit in anywhere in this hour, but we're talking about money. And you mentioned Common Power, and I've been following them. And once I woke up at the beginning of this year, started paying more attention, I'm just so impressed with how they have developed their program and scattered, and they continue to support the concept of working with older people and traveling with them. And I'm not a traveler, so I supported them. And I've been following like what they're doing out there. And what they have learned is that in the swing states, they'll go to like Pennsylvania and they'll say, what do you need? Where do you go? And they'll say, we have all the people that our bases are already covered that we need. And that's to say that a lot of folks are under the impression they're going to be knocking on friendly doors, and it's just a connection job and a reinforcement job. And the Common Power took on the challenge, and they are preparing their people, and they are going out to hostile neighborhoods and knocking on doors to just peel off a few votes here and a few votes there. And I just find that really exciting. So I sent them more money. And
Good
this
choice.
is a plea. If you have extra money, the Common Power is a great place to be giving right now.
So I don't know how many islanders are on the road right now with Common Power, but quite a few. Ron Antonia is going to 4 states, and he's ending up in, I think, Pennsylvania on election day, and Proctor Skank's heading toward Pennsylvania. A lot of people are doing it through Common Power. I was on their site today, and they have where our teams aren't big enough and what else you can do right now, and it's excellent. There was an article in the Times that said 4 or 5 months ago that said that they had some internal administrative disorder. But to me, David Domke, who founded it, is a great American hero. He was professor of communications at UW, and he walked away from being chair of the department and a tenured professor to start Common Power, and he's never looked back. It's undeniably excellent political intermediary. And as some of you may know, it's the Islanders. They were on the island. I was out of town, but they were on the island at the Linwood 6 months or so ago.
oh, I'm
Other
gonna tell you,
questions or thoughts before we move on?
yeah, we're at 2 o'clock, so maybe we should,
Yeah, well, the other 2 sections are briefer, but
okay.
you know what to do if I run over. You just all of a sudden the screen is silent. We want to talk about the courts. So right after the Supreme Court invented a whole new doctrine of presidential immunity, a certain person on this call, namely David S. Harrison, told you to watch for October. And since occasionally Reed and others have reminded me when my predictions have been somewhat off, I want to tell you that I saw this coming, and it's wonderful. Tanya Chutkin never said that she was going to pay any attention to the election cycle, and she hasn't. She's doing as much to face this case that has been filed, these indictments, as she can do given the nature of the Supreme Court's actions. And what they did to Amy Coney Barrett's credit, is set up a standard where she, Chutkin, would have to review Jack Smith's charges and the indictments to see what would be admissible in a trial and would stand in a trial as an indictment, given the Supreme Court's expansive view of immunity. And so that's what happened the other day, and will happen again in 5 days or so. She's going to release some of Jack Smith's appendices to his 165-page brief. And those are FBI notes and grand jury transcripts. So you're going to get another download. So if you're like me, I just don't care if Donald Trump goes to prison or not. I just want Kamala Harris to win the election. If you're like me, that was a major event the other day, because it will, especially on the obvious Trump election denialism, when he knew he lost, a very strong part of Jack Smith's brief was evidence that Donald Trump knew he was lost and was told many times that he lost and referenced it a few times himself. So that's valuable, and obviously Harris's campaign will use that and should. The other thing they'll use a lot is when an aide informed Trump that Pence was in physical jeopardy, that Trump said, "So what?" You'll hear that again right up to the end, and that's meaningful stuff. If some commentator gets on the tube and tells you that none of this matters, that these votes on January 6th are totally fixed, that's just baloney. Nothing's totally fixed. The fact that it's not going to change 7% of the vote is a truism, but every voter is different, what comes into their head, and there isn't a voter that's an independent. If this comes into their head, that wouldn't think, gosh, that seems like a awful thing to say when your vice president is in jeopardy. So I think it's a good thing. If you're following this closely, what to look for is, as you know, the president has virtually unlimited immunity for his official acts and no immunity for his private acts. And then there's a little qualified space in between that they're calling presumptive immunity. What Jack Smith did was quote Amy Coney Barrett's not brief, but opinion in the immunity case to establish and say that any act by Trump to try and recruit false electors would be, by definition, a private act and not even open to presumptive immunity. So that makes, of the three types of charges of Trump, the most powerful, that is fake electors, somewhat a little more making you uneasy if you want a conviction eventually. Say Kamala Harris wins and the trial would go on. The whole issue of whether Trump's conversation with Pence are immunized would be a fundamental issue that would be appealed to the Supreme Court. Well, basically the definition is no danger of an intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive. So what Jack Smith is going to say is that they were private acts when he has already said they're private acts when Pence and Trump were talking, because they were talking about the re-election, not about the affairs of the government. And then Smith is going to say if the court even thinks that there's a presumptive immunity, because that was Pence, that that their discussion was not that trying him for it would not damage the authority and functions of the executive branch. So that's what's going to happen. That's what will be appealed. But in the meantime, we're going to get a further dose of damning information on Trump. The most politically valuable, meaning Trump knew all along that he had lost. And then the other things, the opinion of Jack Smith that Trump caused the riot is always going to be more problematic in court. What's free expression, and Trump's going to say that he didn't, and that'll be harder. It's not going to matter, of course, if Trump got elected, because I had formed the opinion that there would be a way for Chutkin to keep the charges alive, even if Trump were president. The way to fix that is not let Trump be president. I talked to a federal judge about it. He's not so sure that's true. It's true illegally. A judge doesn't have to dismiss a case. It's just not clear how that would work, since you wouldn't have a Justice Department to prosecute. Anyway, that's my story. Jack Smith did do his filing. And NBC said the other day, well, this is relitigating past charges. That's just baloney. Relitigating means going over the same facts. There's a ton of new evidence that wasn't there in the impeachment by Congress and was not there in the impeachment inquiry. This is all new, and will continue to get a lot of attention further along, of course, by Kamala's advertising, and set up further by Walz asking Vance to confirm that he's not a denialist too. Vance's answer was rehearsed, and that's the best they can come up with on focusing on the future. So that's good stuff. It helps us a bit. We'll see how much. Questions and thoughts on this?
One of the things that comes to mind is that we're seeing evidence that the GOP and related Trump supporters are laying groundwork to try to do it again if and when Trump falls short of a clear victory this November. What do you think about Democratic efforts to try to counter that?
I think the DNC and Kamala's campaign are well prepared. I mentioned before on this Zoom that 6 of the 7 swing states, 6 of them have Democratic secretaries of state, and the 7th is Raffensperger, who's already proved himself. And almost all of the governors are Democrats. So I think in the swing states, there'll be fair elections. If local boards refuse to certify, the Secretary of State will otherwise accomplish that certification. The lawsuits that Trump filed last time weren't successful, and he was president then. So I think there will be incidents at the local level and people doing bad things, but I think we'll get election results starting on election night, just like usual. It's interestingly, we knew that Pennsylvania was in Washington at 8 o'clock at night. If the polls are closed, they push a button, and they have already, every one of you who sent in your mail ballot in advance, they haven't counted it, but they certified it, and it's in the computer. It's in whatever counter mechanism they have. And at 8 o'clock, by 20 after 8, you know what the votes are, and all they have left to count are the ones that came in the previous day or so. It's not like that in Pennsylvania. They don't start that review process until the polls are closed. That's why it takes so long. Trump knew that all those mail ballots were going to come in and that he was going to lose his lead. And they told him that. That's why he went out and declared himself the winner of the presidency, because he was still ahead in Pennsylvania. It's pretty outrageous. Other questions? Note that it's not just about Trump. You get 40% of the American public disbelieving in the fairness of elections. That's an awful wound in a democracy that it will take decades to heal.
Cynthia,
Yeah, it's a quickie maybe, but Don just reminded me that there's some funny business in Georgia with the election board being able to delay the count by rejecting,
Just going back to precincts.
going back to the precincts. Any thoughts on that?
I don't see it as a monumental dispute. It's disappointing, but it doesn't go to whether the votes will be counted. So I think there'll be other problems in Georgia. But I think Brian Kemp and Raffensperger will run up. I'm more worried about what they've tried to do in the past in Georgia in terms of number of polling places. I'm not saying that they're not trying to suppress votes. I'm saying that I don't think the latest elections board battle is such a huge issue.
Okay,
Great.
Charlie, April, did you have a comment? Okay, I just saw you. Okay, great. Go ahead. Sorry.
So on our last note, let's do a quick spin against in the Senate and the House. There's a guy in Nebraska named Dan Osborne, who's been involved in labor and political organizing his whole life, who's running as an independent, who's refused to have any contact with the Nebraska Democratic Party, and who is now polling even with Deb Fischer, who's the Republican senator. So it's interesting. If you look at poll averages for him, for Joe Manchin in Montana, for Debbie Murcassel Powell in Florida running against Rick Scott, or Colin Allred running against the infamous Ted Cruz, you could come to the conclusion that the best shot of getting to 50 senators for the Democrats would be to elect the independent Dan Osborne. I think that's true. I don't see how John Tester can survive in Montana, which would leave the Democrats at 49. If I had to pick a Democrat, I'm just reminded of a lot of us got excited about Jamie Harrison beating Lindsey Graham and started citing polls that had him only 2 points behind, and he got beat by 6 or 7. We have to be mindful of the states these people are running in. So on points, Debbie Murcassel Powell is closer because 6 years ago, Rick Scott barely won when he beat Bill Nelson, the former astronaut, and because Joyce is on the ballot. You'd give her a little bit better chance, and that's why Kamala sent her money. But I think, put first in line, you put Dan Osborne. So now comes, well, yeah, if he's elected as an independent, who's he going to caucus with? So he said the other day, I'm not going to caucus. I'll just create an independent caucus, and I'll see if Lisa Murkowski will join me. Well, fat chance, because how you get your committee assignments is through being in a caucus. That's who distributes the committee assignments. They could figure out a way to put you on the government operations subcommittee if you don't join the caucus, but they don't have any incentive. Many years ago, Jim Jeffords, when Reagan was president, switched from Republican to Democrat because they told him he could chair a major committee, Environment and Natural Resources, I think, can't remember. So that could happen with Murkowski, and it could certainly happen with Dan Osborne, that if it's a way to get leverage, I don't think it'll happen with Murkowski because she's 67 So she'll be up again in 71. I don't think she'll be ready to retire. Susan Collins is 71. She's not going to become a Democrat. So if they're looking for somebody to break the tie becoming by caucusing with the Democrats, it would be Osborne. And the reason he would do that is if we won the presidency, because he says what matters most to him is how he delivers to Nebraska. So what is Schumer going to say to you if you have the presidency? It's, I am going to be able to help you serve Nebraska more than whoever the new Republican majority leader would be, which is going to be John Cornyn or John Thune. So that's will be their argument. Whoever wins the presidency will have hands down better chance to make Dan Osborne go with them if he wins, which he may not do, but I think it's quite possible he will. And then if you're going to pine for anyone else, I would definitely pine for Castle over Allred, and I would thank John Tester for his service. When the person at the top of the ticket in Montana, in this case, Trump, wins by 12, 14, 15%, all those people have to vote for Trump and Tester. And that's just too big of a rock to push up the hill, I think. So we need another seat or we'll end up at 49. Oh, and then on the House, some of you know you watch the generic vote. That's a poll question that says, would you vote for the Democrat or the Republican running for Congress? And right now we're averaging about 2.5% ahead in the generic vote. That's with the distribution of Democrats in the country or supporters of Democrats. That's about exactly the number you would need to have the House be almost equally divided. What you're looking for is we have more Republicans who won in Biden's districts than Democrats who won in Trump's. Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is one of 4 Democrats who won in a Trump district, and I think she'll be fine. So you're looking at some good take back opportunities, especially in North Carolina, California and New York. And therefore, I think if the election's virtually tied, that Democrats will take back the House by a small margin, and Hakeem Jeffries will be Speaker. So both houses will be virtually tied, and hopefully Kamala Harris will be president. And that's my thinking. We could have a Zoom the Friday before the election. That's up to Reed. I don't know what we would say to each other except make our predictions. So maybe we should have a Zoom the Friday after and so.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
What do you all think? Shall we regroup next
Let's-
on the 8th?
Yeah, let's do after, and that will allow us to interpret what happened. Hopefully there
Okay.
won't be any crying in the beer.
Yes.
Any other questions, thoughts, or concerns? Insights?
I wonder if you have any thoughts about any of the other, you mentioned obviously pro-choice abortion decisions on the ballot across the country. We have some pretty lively ballot issues here in Washington State, of course. I don't know whether you want to comment on any of those.
Well, just briefly, I thought, as you know, these are all a package put together by a huge Republican donor. And what the Democrats did is they took the most palatable of them and passed them into the law. And now we have big battles over capital gains tax and over the carbon markets and carbon tax and such. And I was looking at polling the other day. I'm surprised at how close it is. I believe that there's been some contribution of carbon markets to gas price, but I would keep that law because we've got, guess what? Climate change. It's going to destroy our planet eventually. So we need to decrease carbon, and that's what that law does. So with the capital gains tax, I just don't get it. It's a tax on people that have more than $250,000 in stock capital gains in a year. And it's a tax on a small percentage of Washingtonians who in a sales tax state do not close to pay any significant share of the taxes. And so they finally found a legal way to do it. And why the middle class taxpayers of Washington would overturn that is crazy. And part of the reason why they would do that, of course, is people who aren't rich always kind of hope they will be. So they're voting to eliminate a tax they don't want to pay sometime in their future. It's too bad because it just puts more stress on the sales tax, which is already near 10%.
And the third issue is that long-term
blanking.
care.
I'm blanking. Oh
Is that
yeah, it's ending long-term care, which is it's a messy law, but I certainly wouldn't use this process to eliminate it. But I don't know that issue.
Okay, any other comments or questions before we call time? As always, David, I really want to thank you. It really helps put some perspective, and thanks for the 10 things to think about between now and election day. That helps.
Similar material will appear in my blog that comes out in a couple of days.
Great. And we always link to that blog in our link after the fact, but it's called what's it called? Our ongoing
Unfinished work.
Unfinished work. And so we'll send a link to that, but it's ourunfinishedwork.com. So easy to find. Thanks again. Have a good
Thanks,
final
everyone.
push.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.